chased by the deep state, fighting for independence, thinking about revolution, looking for alternative solutions. The enemies of the deep state will tell you what others even don't dare to think. Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski.
Hello. Welcome to the next edition of the geopolitical podcast, DieGutenMenschen, Public Enemies of the Deep State. Here is still Manuel Ochsenreiter speaking, editor-in-chief of German news magazine Zuerst. And as usual and always, I talk to my friend and colleague Mateusz Piskorski from Poland. Hello, Mateusz.
Yes, hello from a country neighboring with Belarus.
Oh, and here are we already at the topic. How is there everything? I mean, the news are now full with it. Also, I have to admit that for now, the big interest I don't see, for example, in German mainstream media. So maybe you can explain a little bit what is going on over there in Belarus.
Well, as usually after the elections, since 26 years, actually, since 1994, when Mr. Lukashenko came to power, we have some protests which are to a large extent foreign inspired. And we can say that, this time they are really quite big and massive, and they remind me 2010. 10 years ago, I was there as an observer at the elections, at the presidential elections, and there was a similar scenario played there in Minsk. From the very beginning, we knew that the protests will take place, of course. I mean, you probably have heard about the provocation of Ukrainian Secret Service, the SBU, which arranged a fake mission of mercenaries, the supposed Russian mercenaries there in Minsk. Then the mercenaries were detained there. They were arrested and so on. So the Belarusians almost spoiled their relations with Russia. The idea was to isolate them completely from potential support of Moscow and of other partners, to spoil their relations with their strategic partners, and then to prepare for, let's say, Ukrainian scenario, the scenario of Maidan of 2014. So the technology is quite similar, although we had some, let's say, new inventions, and we could also discuss that from the point of view of pure technology. So we can discuss two aspects: the geopolitical one, of course, and the technological one. You have asked about Poland. I know that in Germany, in France, or in other, let's say, old European continental countries, the Belarusian topic is not so present in the media, yes?
No, exactly. No, I mean, it seems to me like there is now again Corona gaining the number one place, but not so much Belarus. So a lot of, and if you look on Twitter, a lot of these neoliberal journalists who are usually supporting any kind of color revolution are tremendously complaining that Belarus doesn't get the space what it would deserve in.
Yes, nevertheless, you have a long time tradition of ministers of foreign affairs who are trying to comment on Belarusian issues. I just would remind you that in 2010 it was famous Guido Westerwelle, and yes, and his debate with Lukashenko, yes. And now, as far as I know, also Heiko Maas has voiced some of his concerns for human rights.
Just for our very young listeners who might not know about this. Shall we shortly reenact the struggle between Westerwelle and Lukashenko? I am Westerwelle and you are Lukashenko.
Manuel, but
that they understand.
Don't force me to be a Lukashenko, because all our profiles will meet the same fate as the profiles of Alexander Dugin lately if we would play such a role playing.
But it would be just a historical reenactment for the education of the young readers. But just to explain to them, so Guido Westerwelle back then was calling Lukashenko a dictator, and Lukashenko,
the last dictator of Europe.
Yeah, the last dictator of Europe, and Lukashenko answered, better dictator than gay.
Yes, exactly.
because for the young listeners, Guido Westerwelle was the first homosexual foreign minister of Germany back then.
Although Heiko Maas is, as far as I know, not a homosexual minister, but anyway,
he's our first metrosexual minister.
Yeah, but anyway, he shares the opinion of Guido Westerwelle on the topic, I guess.
Of course.
Anyway, you are right. Generally, you are right that the topic of Belarus is not so present in Germany, in France, in a lot of European countries, but you remember this old concept of the so-called New Europe.
Yes.
The concept which was invented by the administration of George W. Bush in the beginning of our century, and it was during the times when the new countries were entering European Union, new countries like Poland, like the Baltic states and the others. It was in times of the conflicts of the U.S. aggression against Iraq. At that time, of course, Bush was controlling actually all the Central European countries, or almost all of those countries, which were the new members of European Union. Also tried to, let's say, become the instruments of American policy on the post-Soviet area. We have the same situation, similar situation now, because when it comes to Belarus and the Belarusian topics, we have announcements of ministers of foreign affairs, of politicians, particularly from Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. So they explain that they are the neighbors, the countries neighboring with Belarus, and they are particularly concerned with the human rights issues and so on. Yes, so now they are trying to openly interfere into Belarusian internal politics. They are trying also, of course, to convince everyone, which is complete absurd, that the situation in Belarus is because of the Russians' influences there and so on. Yes, so they are, as usually, they are used by the Department of State for, let's say, organizing the unrest in Belarus and so on. This is not the matter that I'm going to tell and to convince you that there are no protests, no genuine protests in Belarus, because, of course, there are some protests. We have to know that, even due to the fact that Lukashenko is in power since 26 years, since 1994, yes, and some of the young people, the Belarusians, were born and don't remember, were born in the 90s and even don't remember world without Lukashenko, yes?
Like Germany with Merkel, a lot of...
Yes, exactly. And, this is an important factor because some of the people are simply tired with Lukashenko. They think that and something new, a real change when it comes to the leadership of the country would make everything different and so on, yes? So there was a small group of people, I would estimate this group of around, let's say, 7 to 8% of the Belarusian population, which was really ready to protest, yes? But of course, as in all other cases, when there is even a small potential of protest, some external forces are trying to take over the control and to ignite, from a small protest to ignite a revolution, yes? That was also the case in Belarus this time. was some interesting. You were asking about Poland. So let me tell you a short story as an example of the things we are talking about. Just a few days ago, we got an information that two poor Polish students were detained by the brutal police in Belarus, in Minsk, arrested and so on and so on. Yes,
I feel you. I feel you.
So all the media, all the media in Poland, including the liberal media, including the liberal politicians and so on, were outraged and trying to defend the young innocent students. Yes, but very soon, I mean, it's enough to check in the internet with the names of those students, that those students are members of some, let's say, ultranationalist organizations from Poland, which have before cooperated with the Azov battalion in Ukraine, yes? Mm-hmm. So they were not so pure innocent students, but the guys who were shooting and killing the people in the south of Ukraine, probably, yes? Mm-hmm. So this is the case. I mean, it's similar with the citizens of some other European countries, and this reminds us Ukraine. I mean, some radical elements, some extremist elements from Western countries have been sent to Ukraine, as you remember, to ignite the protests, and now we have the same scenario in Belarus. On the other hand, we have a lot of Polish guys there by accident present in Belarus in those days, in the days of elections, guys who are sponsored by George Soros, for instance, yes, of, several foundations and so on, who are represented there. We have a star, almost a pop star, the so-called contemporary Western intellectual scene, Timothy Snyder. You know, the guy,
of course.
He was writing about you and me as well.
Yes, he's a fan of us. Yes.
Yes. So, by accident, Timothy Snyder is also there giving his stupid comments from Belarus, yes? So, and he's sponsored as well by Soros, and so, yes, so everything is quite obvious. I mean, the whole protest is also coordinated via social media. And there is a very, very interesting thing that you probably know that a 22-year-old Belarusian living in Poland, a poor Belarusian student living in Poland, is leading one of the biggest channels at Telegram, as well as on YouTube, a professional channel on YouTube, promoting the protests, igniting the protests, and giving the instructions.
What is the name of this channel?
The name is Niechta in Belarusian, but in Latin letters, in Latin, it would be Nexta.
Yes, and that now we talk, because that is quite interesting. I say now Nexta as a good Central European, because that is nobody heard of that guy before in Europe, and all of the sudden this person, or I would even say there is a group behind this person, overly professionally is flooding all Western news. I mean, wherever the news about Belarus are coming, you see the water sign of Nexta in the videos. And I think now we speak about technology.
Yes, but Manuel, it's quite obvious. I mean, we both have some experience in media, yes? And we perfectly know that it's really impossible to organize, let's say, media with such a coverage, with such a number of news and posts every day, yes, by one student. If he wouldn't do anything except just sitting at the computer 24 hours a day and so on, it's physically impossible.
Exactly.
So there's a group of people in charge of that. There's a group of people which is, of course, professional and well paid, as it can be seen in their YouTube channel with the same name, and a group of people which gives the instructions through the social media to the protesters. Yes, that's quite obvious. I mean, we know that this is the technology. Actually, when it comes to Belarus, we are both with you experts when it comes to the so-called color revolutions, to countering them and so on. But I remember the situation from Ukraine several years ago. I think it was the first Maidan in 2004. So I remember that some people were showing me a small bar for the youth people in the center of Kiev, and in the underground of this bar or pub, some 10 or 15 people were sitting with the computers and so on, with mobile phones and controlling everything. And these were the guys from Otpor, from Serbia.
Yes.
So they were coordinating everything, yes, but they were hiding anyway, yes. And now we had a friend of Timothy Snyder, Sławomir Sierakowski from Poland, who openly told just a few days ago in the Polish media that yes, we are giving the instructions. So they are even publicly admitting that they are instructing the protesters, yes, to become more violent and so on. So this is the difference. I mean, they are even not hiding this. They are doing that openly. So it's very easy to understand for the whole world. I think that already the Russian authorities, regardless the let's say poor relations between Minsk and Moscow lately, they have already warned that the things which are going on now in Minsk are another attempt of a color revolution, yes, on the post-Soviet area.
When we speak about revolution technology, I have a question. So in the last days, we were also flooded with many symbolically overloaded pictures. Like I want just to give one example. The women wearing white and protesting during the day with flowers in their hands. Do you think this is an idea made up by some oppositional women somewhere in Belarus, or do you think this is also a revolution technology for creating such pictures, flooding first of all the social media, of course, in the West, but maybe also later the conventional media?
In my opinion, it's a kind of reaction or a kind of PR crisis management, because, if you would trace the materials which were posted in the internet, yes, I don't know if you have traced the movies posted in the internet from the first night after the elections.
No.
Well, there was some violent, brutal sense of the intervening policemen and so on, yes? So this was the first stage, of course, as usually. Then there was a quite professional counter-reaction of the Belarusian authorities and media, which have posted a lot of movies showing the brutality of the protesters. Like, there was a very famous movie when a protester was driving a car and crushing a policeman standing on the street.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I think that at a certain moment, after a very professional and accurate reaction of the Belarusian media, they wanted to, the coordinators of the protests wanted to soften a little bit the image of the protesters. And that was the reason why they were invented those women protests, all dressed in white with flowers, so on. Yes, this was the case because at a certain moment we just saw we just also saw the guys who were detained by the police. Then there were some of them they were recorded by the police, and they were admitting, for instance, that they were sentenced several times for different criminal offenses. Yes, so the image of the protesters was, let's say, very brutal. That's why someone invented the woman in white and the flowers, I guess.
Yeah, that is because, I mean, that was a very strong and a very impressive action where I am convinced that it will hit directly into the heart of, these many liberal Western social media users. And that reminded me also a little bit about some images we got from the Maidan, especially in March, February, March 2014. You remember this girl standing there? I am Ukrainian.
Yes, of
Yeah,
course.
and
It's a similar technology, yes, but they haven't taken into account that the Belarusian system is far more and far better organized than the Ukrainian one. I mean, first and foremost, most of the members of Belarusian elites are loyal to the system, yes? You cannot... Second, you don't have the oligarchs, which could support the opposition as well, yes? And mobilize the opposition. I mean, you don't have local oligarchs. Third, I know that it would be very hard for you to spell the name of the main opposition candidate, as it's a Polish-sounding name.
Oh, let me try.
Miss yes.
Tikhanovskaya.
Perfect. So anyway, she was just a housewife, yes.
Yeah.
So she was not known there in Belarus. She isn't a charismatic leader and so on, and she has left Belarus for Lithuania, yes. Yeah. So I think that there are no leaders. I mean, in the Ukrainian case, you had a group of 5 or 6 leaders of the protest who are, let's say, recognized by the people who are known from the Ukrainian politics and so on, yes. In Belarus, on the one hand, you have a very charismatic leader, regardless how what do we think about his politics and so on, but he's really a real charismatic leader, Alexander Lukashenko. And on the side of the opposition, you have no one. Mm-hmm. Practically, you have only the no names there, yes, people who are, housewives or bloggers and so on. So it's much harder for them, for the external forces to coordinate protests or a coup d'etat in such a country, and which is also very important, I think, here. Is the fact that Belarus is the only country. I would even risk to tell you that it is the only country on the whole post-Soviet area which has a real social and sovereign economic policy. Yes. Yeah. Which means that they have preserved all the state enterprises, state factories, companies, and so on, and that actually the level of life, the level of well-being there in Belarus is far higher and better than let's say, the level of life and of social policy in the neighboring Ukraine or even the Baltic countries. And this is the difference also, yes?
I have a very last question when it comes to the technology, because what is important for such events is, of course, also the colors and the flag you give yourself. And what I see is that the opposition in Belarus is using the white, red, white flag in difference to the official flag of Belarus, which is green and red with this Slavic pattern in it. What does that exactly mean? Because as far as I know, wasn't the white, red, white flag, the Belarusian flag, also of the Belarusian Socialist Republic during the Soviet Union, at least for a certain time?
Yes, Alexander Lukashenko and his, let's say, state ideology is based partly on the Soviet heritage. Yeah. Which means, he hasn't rejected the Soviet period in the history of Belarus. which is quite important, and which built a large part of his legitimacy there in Belarus. On the other hand, the opposition always claimed that they are supporting the idea of, not only independent but even nationalist Belarus. But the ethno-nationalist movement is also, when it comes to Belarus, is much more weaker than the ethno-nationalist movement in Ukraine, for instance. So although they use the flags, as you have mentioned, the flags which are somehow, let's say, connected to the nationalist traditions in Belarus, there are practically no followers of ethnic anti-Russian, let's say, nationalism in Belarus. Yes, they of course they have their own identity and so on, but they, on the other hand, they still recognize themselves as a part of a huge, let's say, Russian civilization. Yes. Mm-hmm. So this is also the difference between them and at least the some parts and some regions of Ukraine. That's why the nationalist or ethno-nationalist factor is very difficult to be used there. That's why actually, if you look at the protesters, and that tells us about the helplessness of the organizers of the protests. Actually, if you look at the protesters, you cannot find any clear political agenda or clear political demands from their side. Have you noticed any? I mean,
no, not at all. Exactly, no.
Yeah, usually, I mean, even in Ukraine, there were some, people criticizing and protesting against corruption and so on and so on. Yes, here you have nothing. Yeah. I think that, very soon everything will be under control. On the other hand, I just think that the most important fact after the elections was the fact that Lukashenko first got congratulated by Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader. Second, he got congratulations from Vladimir Putin, the Russian president as well, which means that he has strong allies from the geopolitical point of view. That's why I think he's safe. And Belarus is safe as well.
I have a very last question when it comes more to the economic or the geo-economic and geopolitical similarities between Belarus and Ukraine, since this is also, I mean, everyone, expert and non-expert, is now comparing the events in Belarus with Ukraine. So when it comes to the Maidan and to Ukraine, I noticed back then that there are among the opposition two very, very strong narratives. Narrative number one was the narrative of the strong and independent Ukraine, which is absolutely capable to stand economically on its own feet, not just in the modus of economy or agricultural economy, but also when it comes to industry and so on. And the second narrative was that the EU and the strong EU, and especially, of course, economically strong Germany, are both ready to compensate the losses Ukraine would suffer in case they get more distance to Russia and would integrate Ukraine into the EU. Also, you know and I know that was never the case, and you know and I know that there was never a serious thought within the EU to take Ukraine. It was all propaganda because the EU simply couldn't afford, and don't explain to any German taxpayer that he has to pay more taxes to integrate Ukraine into EU. But what I wanted to ask you, since one thing is similar, and this is the strong integration and the strong connection of the Belarusian economy and also of the Ukrainian economy with the Russian economy, are such narratives also existent in Belarus? Is the Belarusian opposition saying that they can easily afford to break the ties and to cut the ties with Russia and to go into the direction of Europe. And are there similar narratives existent?
No, they are talking more about the European human rights standards and so on. In Ukraine, it was very easy to refer to European Union as an area of economic and social stability and welfare and the welfare states. And on the other hand, in Belarus, it would be much more harder. Let's take an example of the agricultural policy. Do you know what is the percent of the dotations, the subventions for the European farmers? I mean, in percentage.
Oh, no,
of their product. It's
I know where to look for it, but I have.
It's just according to the new financial perspective, because before it was much more, yes. But according to the new EU financial perspective, 2021-2027, it's around 37%.
Yeah. Well.
While in Belarus, it's 40%. So, for instance, when it comes to their instruments of supporting the farmers, the agricultural sector, and so on, they are even ahead of European Union now, yes. When it comes to the social guarantees and social rights of the people, like, having a possibility to be reimbursed when buying a flat and so on, yes. Yeah. It's also much more social and welfare-oriented state than most of the European Union countries. Yes. So I mean European Union, and I mean the people in Belarus are also traveling around. Yes. Yeah. So for instance, many of them are traveling, for instance, to Poland, and they see the neoliberal paradigm in Poland, let's say destruction of Polish economy in the 90s by the neoliberals. And they can easily compare that with the Belarusian economy, which is still state-controlled and which enables the state to provide at least the basic level of social services to all of the Belarusian people. So I mean, EU is not so attractive for the Belarusians when it comes to the social standards, when it comes to funding and so on. But the protesters are using the rhetorics of human rights and standards, yes, instead of that, which is not so strongly appealing as the financial or social aspect. I think you agree, and that's why. Once more, we can just stress here that the things in Belarus will not be so easy as in Ukraine. I think we should devote a separate podcast, of course, if our listeners are interested in that topic, to different paths of transformation after the fall of Soviet Union. Just to say it very shortly, as we don't have any more time. When it comes to three different paths, you had Ukraine, which is an oligarchic state, where, to say it very simply, the oligarchs and the big capital controls the politics, yes? Yeah. I think you agree.
Yes.
Yeah. You had the same tendency in Russia in the Yeltsin times, in the 90s. Mm-hmm. But of course, it has completely changed under Vladimir Putin. Anyway, still in Russia, you also have some elements of oligarchic systems. But the Russian oligarchic system is, of course, controlled and restricted by the politicians, by the political factor. Yeah. While in Belarus, which is the third model, a huge part of national economy is still controlled by the state. So you don't have any oligarchs there. Mm-hmm. You don't have any multinational corporations there. I don't know if you know, but Belarus is probably one of the very last countries of Europe, of our continent, who is not the member of WTO.
No.
Only this year. I mean, they were intending to to become a member of WTO by the end of this year or in the beginning of the next year. The negotiations were very, very hard, and Lukashenko and his people were, let's say, very strongly defending their interests when it comes to WTO also. So this is a completely different system, more sovereignist, more social oriented, which makes it probably more immune for against all these attempts of color revolutions.
That was maybe one of the most interesting podcasts we ever did, because I believe that the time we spoke was filled with much more information than 3 days of Twitter and social media research of so-called Belarusia experts among European or Western Belarusia experts. And of course, I hope that Timothy Snyder was listening to us.
Yes, hopefully.
Yes.
So, by the way, I really hope that, of course, we'll be looking at the development of all the situation in Belarus. And I really hope that very soon we'll be able to invite some Belarusian guests for our
That
podcast.
would be amazing. That would be really amazing. So
Yeah.
let's work on this. Thank you very much again for your time. We will come soon again, and let's hope that the things will go on more or less peaceful, that the situation will calm down in Belarusia, and that there won't be a second Ukraine, as a lot of people who see very, very black are already predicting.
Exactly, and we, as usually, enhance our listeners to share their opinions also on Belarus and the situation in Belarus.
Timothy, this is also for you. Don't be shy.
Of course, we especially appeal to him to share his views.
And he could even join our show. I heard his English is more or less okay.
Yes. With a little American accent, but anyway.
Oh, there we are generous, I think.
Yeah.
We won't blame him. We won't blame him for his hard childhood.
We promise to be very tolerant. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you again.
Thanks a lot, and hear you soon.
This program was presented to you by Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski, the hottest dissident who won't violate any time the global rules against racism, extremism, or any other bad isms.